Welcome back. Today's video is the MSI GS66 Stealth. MSI's really packed quite a number of features into this laptop, and it certainly looks very striking. However, does it have the performance to match its looks? Well, let's find out. Let's roll. So I've had this unit for the better part of a week. You know, the design on this unit is incredibly striking. I like how subtle it is. It doesn't scream gaming laptop at you, but it still has a lot of gaming features for the gamers out there. So it's really kind of a good dual purpose unit. Something that's a little more discreet than what you're mostly finding out there in the marketplace. And so let's go over a little bit of the specs on this unit. So the lid itself, all aluminum design along with the deck, and then even the bottom. Lots of venting on the rear to keep things cool. Most laptops out there have two fans, one for the CPU, one for the GPU. But this one doesn't just have two, it has a third fan for that GPU, which is great to see to keep things very cool on this unit. Now overall, this does certainly have a striking design similarity to the Razer Blade 15. If you're interested in knowing all about the aesthetics on this unit, take a look at the unboxing and first impressions video above. It goes through this laptop in great detail. Now let's talk about how it operates. There's a couple things that strike me about this laptop. Number one, the design of this is very impressive. It gives a nice subtle look over most of the gaming laptops that are out there right now. And so it doesn't have a plethora of RGB. Of course, the RGB that is on the unit is on the keyboard, which can be turned off. It does feature a SteelSeries keyboard. Per key RGB. Overall, the keyboard itself though, I find that the keys are just a bit squishy. They're okay, keycaps are okay. The spacing could just be a little bit wider. There's plenty of room on the other side, so they could have done that, but I just find that it's an average keyboard overall. I don't love it, I don't hate it, but it's one of those things where I just wish it was a little bit better. The one thing I don't like about this laptop is actually how big this precision touchpad is. So the issue is that when you rest your palms on the laptop itself, you're often just clicking into the touchpad. I just think that's a big miss overall. I feel like it could just be moved over a little bit. So a couple noteworthy things about this laptop. Number one, it has Windows Hello. That is a nice feature. A lot of laptops just simply don't have that. So the one thing I've noticed is that when you get to about here, the laptop will go ahead and turn itself off. I just find that usually it's all the way shut before it finally does its shut off. So I just wish that it wasn't quite there. A little bit minor annoyance. So in terms of the web camera, well, let's take a look. So in terms of the web camera, it's actually quite decent. It's a 720p camera, a little grainy, but fairly good quality overall. However, the audio is the biggest weak spot. You can definitely hear some background noise coming in. So that brings me to my next issue, and the fan itself never turns off. So it's always spinning. And I just feel like if you're gonna put stealth into your product name, then it certainly should live up to that expectation. It just isn't stealth. This is always constantly going. So I think that's a big design miss. I just wish they would have figured out the thermals so that they could actually make that fan completely silent. So how's audio on this unit? Well, it does feature two speakers upward firing at the user. But let's take a listen. Let me know what you think. So overall audio quality, one, it gets very loud, but the problem at that loud level is it's incredibly bright. Like the treble on this is just, it hurts the ears, to be honest. So I feel like you'll never keep it maxed out just as a result of that. But overall, I just feel like the audio quality is a little lackluster in this laptop. One, it'll get you by, no question, but there's certainly better out there. And as always, you're just gonna wanna put on some headphones that have a little bit heavier drivers on them to really get that great immersive experience. So let's go over the specs on this unit. Let's crack her open and see what's under the hood. So we have a i7-10750H, that's 6 cores, 12 threads. Also it comes with dual channel 16 gigs of memory, of course a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. We have incredibly large battery at 99.9 watt hour, legal limit for flights, and that gives us a full 5 hours and 51 minutes, which is a great amount of battery life for this laptop. Now in terms of the screen, it does feature a 1080p 300 hertz screen, getting up to 100% of the sRGB, so your colors really pop on screen. So in terms of screen bleed on this unit, it actually fared pretty well. Of course, you have your usual IPS backglow. However, there's a little, just slight up in the upper left-hand corner, but overall, I didn't really notice it in dimly lit situations. So I think for this one, it's a pass. So as it relates to using this laptop outside, overall, the brightness is fairly good. It's not the greatest, but as you can see, when it's outside, it actually fares fairly decent. Of course, you won't want to be in direct sunlight with the sun behind you, pointing on the laptop, but if you're just pointed away from it, it actually fares pretty good. So next, let's take a look at the performance. Let's get to the benchmarks on this unit. So first up, we have PC Mark 10. This came in at a score of 5644. So moving over to Cinebench R20, this came in at 3042. Heading over to Superposition, just slightly behind the Triton 500 overall. And you have to keep in mind, this is exactly the same spec. The only difference is that this GPU is capped at 80 watts. So something that you'll start to notice throughout most of the benchmarks here. Heading over to 3D Mark, of course, Port Royal came at 4271, TimeSpy 6979, and Firestrike Extreme at 8691. Moving over to Call of Duty Modern Warfare, max setting, ray tracing on, tessellation to near, posted a score of 66 frames per second. Heading over to Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So in both Extreme and Extreme with Cooler Boost, came in at 91 and 94 frames per second. Let's take a look at the temperatures. So you can see when sitting in the Extreme with Cooler Boost, this came in at a ear-screeching 62 decibels. And as a result, gave you the best thermal performance at 79 degrees on the CPU and 62 on the GPU, and posting that 94 frames per second. So when you bring that down to Extreme, you get a noise output of about 50 decibels, and of course a trade-off with thermals, 84 on the CPU and 70 on the GPU. But the frames per second only dropped by 3 to 91 frames per second, so overall fairly decent. However, when you look at the Acer, it certainly is able to provide more frames per second by almost about 10 to 15%. However, you are trading that with a little bit louder and a little bit higher temperatures. Heading over to Metro Exodus. So Extreme came in at 30 frames per second, and at Ultra, 54 frames per second. Heading over to Death Stranding. This came in at 70 frames per second on Extreme. And then moving into Forza Horizon 4, this came in at 117 frames per second. Moving over to Microsoft Flight Simulator, this posted a score of 32.6 frames per second. Heading over to Red Dead Redemption 2, all ultra settings, this came in at 48.27 frames per second. Moving over to Fortnite, so under Epic settings, this came in at 83 frames per second, and with Epic with DLSS to quality, this came in at 85 frames per second. So not a big jump as it relates to moving to DLSS in this bench. Heading over to Apex Legends, this posted a score of 115 frames per second. And then just looking at a couple of the other titles that I brought into the mix here, Far Cry coming in at 98 to 100 frames per second with Far Cry 5. The Division 2 at 70 frames per second, Horizon Dawn 66 frames per second, of course Watch Dogs Legion at 53 to 54 frames per second. So taking a look at the benchmarks, you can definitely tell that the Stealth is power limited. At only 80 watts, that severely limits its power output. Now, it's still decent in terms of frames per second, but when you compare that to the Triton 500, you can definitely see that you're giving up around 10 to 15% of performance improvement compared to this. Now that being said, it does run quieter, sitting at around that 50 decibels, which is very decent. So you get a much quieter gaming experience, and for some, that might be worth it. However, for me, I find that I'd rather have just slightly more performance, and there's certainly a lot of different choices out there. So let's talk about final thoughts on the Stealth. Well, while this is a great looking laptop in general, I do find that it just has too many flaws. Number one, touchpad. Touchpad too wide, palm always hitting it, click, 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 click. Other component is the fact that the actual chassis itself is a fingerprint magnet. You can see just after a week, and I've rubbed this down, cleaned it up a little bit. It's still obviously picking up a lot of fingerprints. And in fact, I have seen that the chassis itself is a little prone to scratching as well. So this is the second laptop that I've had. Either I'm getting rougher on these laptops, or these last two actually have a finer coat on them, which give it a really good look, but prone to some wear and tear. So just be aware of that. The other issue, just around the speakers just being a little too bright, and then of course that the fan is always on. I find, again, it's just counterintuitive to call something stealth if it can't be completely silent. So in terms of a score for this unit, well, with those detractors in mind, I have to give this a 6 out of 10. It is better than, of course, the Triton 300, but it just doesn't set itself far enough apart from most of the other laptops in its category. However, that being said, this is one of the quieter laptops you can get. So if that's important for you, this is certainly one that you want to look at. Well, that wraps up the review on the GS66 Stealth. Hope you liked the video. Please leave a comment down below. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe to it. Of course, I'll put a link to this laptop in the description down below. And until next time, bye for now.